For this audience, Frederick Douglass and Abraham Lincoln need no introduction. The great abolitionist and escaped slave from Maryland, and a president whose anti-slavery stand transformed into something much more in the crucible of a horrible civil war, had a complex and enduring relationship. Douglass felt President Lincoln initially was too timid in refusing to make the war about ending slavery. That changed, of course, with the Emancipation Proclamation. He also criticized Lincoln for his support for the idea of resettling freed slaves abroad. But then Lincoln moved on slavery, and Douglass praised him. Douglass outlived Lincoln by many years, and as events during Reconstruction and beyond went off the rails, Douglass alternated between praising Lincoln and criticizing him and the white power structure. For our purposes tonight, on the 250th anniversary of the Declaration of Independence, it's important to ask what such phrases as all men are created equal and life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness meant to these two men united in greatness, but separated by a yawning racial divide. Mr. Douglass will answer these questions and much more for us tonight. But before I introduce our presenter, I must pay tribute to Dr. John Willen, the Lincoln Group's longtime vice president of programming, who is stepping aside from that post. His tireless work for the group and for the Civil War Roundtable is much appreciated. Happily, he will remain on the Lincoln Group's board of directors. John, why don't you stand up? Take a bow. And now let's introduce Frederick Douglass. Nathan Richardson. Nathan is tremendously busy. He is the foremost interpreter of Mr. Douglass. He's also an author and a performance poet. He has been doing Douglass for 14 years now before all kinds of audiences, some 500 performances and counting. And when I asked him to appear here tonight and looked at his schedule, had to fit him in between his travels. The ice storm has cut into his business, however, he tells me. You can learn more about Nathan and his varied work at www.scpublishing.com. And I'm happy to say that after many years of living in the Tidewater region of Virginia, Nathan and Mr. Douglass have relocated to suburban Maryland. I hope that means we'll be seeing a lot more of him. And now, our star of the evening, Frederick Douglass.
Thank you. Thank you. Good evening, fellow citizens. Ladies and gentlemen, and I say that with great satisfaction that this audience is no more promiscuous. I've been certainly sitting there quite startled at some of the things that are going on in this modern era, including the necessaries, which are now promiscuous. So I have to be very careful when I enter to make sure that I don't interrupt the ladies. But I am here with unusual diffidence. It is with great satisfaction that I've been invited here, Mrs. President of the Civil War Roundtable of the District of Columbia and the Lincoln Group. And so when I got the invitation, my daughter Rosetta said, "Father, looks like you're going to Washington, D.C." And I was quite delighted. And so I'm also delighted that you asked me to speak on something other than my narrative of how I escaped from bondage and taught myself how to read and write. When I started speaking with Mr. Garrison and the Garrisonians, they would frequently try to get me to stick to the story. They would stick to the story, Frederick. But I certainly had more to speak on than just my life and times in my career in bondage. I had the idea of abolition. and the new understanding of what an abolitionist was. And so I wanted to speak on those things. And so tonight I have that opportunity. You have called me to speak, and I have obeyed your call. And so as I'm talking, forgive my 207-year-old mind if I pause for a moment. I might be consulting God, who knows all the things I have done and the things I have left undone. And so I thought I would start this evening's conversation with a memory that I had in 1862 in Boston. I was talking to a gentleman over here that's from Boston. A couple of other people mentioned Boston. In 1862, when I came to a place like this to give an oration, and we were ran out of the hall. And when I'm reading the newspapers, as I have been recently, I was in Valley Forge speaking to some teachers, and I was looking at the papers, and I couldn't find a paper from Valley Forge, and I saw the Washington Post, and you all mentioned the Washington Post tonight. And the Washington Post has in its headlines that free speech is in jeopardy in this modern hour. And so it made me think about when I was in Boston and giving a speech, and we were interrupted. And so I thought I might give you some memory of that speech. Boston is a great city, and Music Hall has a fame almost as extensive as Boston. Nowhere more than here have the principles of human freedom been expounded. But for the circumstances already mentioned, it would seem almost presumptuous for me to say anything here about those principles. And yet even here in Boston, the moral atmosphere is dark and heavy. The principles of human liberty, even when apprehended correctly, find little support in this hour of trial. The world moves slowly, and Boston is much like the world. We thought the principle of free speech was an accomplished fact. Here, if nowhere else, we thought, the right of the people to assemble and to express their opinion was secure. Dr. Channing had defended the right. Mr. Garrison had practically asserted the right. And Theodore Parker had maintained it with steadiness and fidelity till the last. Yet here we are today, contending for what we thought was gained years ago. The mortifying and disgraceful fact stares us in the face that though Faneuil Hall and Bunker Hill monuments stand, freedom of speech is struck down. No lengthy detail of the facts is needed. They are already notorious, far more so than will be wished 10 years hence. The world knows that on last Monday, a meeting assembled to address the question, how shall slavery be abolished? The world also knows that that meeting was invaded, insulted, captured by a mob of gentlemen, and thereafter broken up and dispersed by the order of the mayor, who refused to protect it, though called upon to do so. If this had been a mere outbreak of passion and prejudice of the baser sort, maddened by rum and hounded on by some wily politician to achieve some immediate purpose, it might be allowed to rest with what has already been said. But the leaders of the mob were gentlemen. These were men who prided themselves on their respect for law and order. These gentlemen brought with them their respect for law and loudly proclaimed it while in the very act of breaking the law. Theirs was the law of slavery, the law of free speech, and the law protecting the assemblance of public meetings. They trampled underfoot while they greatly magnified the law of slavery. The scene was an instructive one. Men seldom see such a blending of the gentleman with the rowdy as was seen on that occasion, which proves that human nature is very much the same whether in a tarpon or a broadcloth. Nevertheless, when gentlemen approach us in the character of lawless and abandoned loafers, they have themselves to blame if they are estimated below their quality. No law was deemed by the fathers of the government more sacred than the law of speech. It was in their eyes, as in the eyes of all thoughtful men, the great moral renovator of society and government. Daniel Webster called it a homebred right, a fireside privilege. Liberty was meaningless when the right to utter one's thoughts and opinions had ceased to exist. That of all rights is the dread of tyrants. It is the right which they first of all strike down. They know its power, thrones, dominions, principalities, and powers. Slavery will not tolerate free speech. 5 years of its exercise will banish the auction block and break every chain in the South. Equally clear is the right to hear. It is just as criminal to violate the right of a man to speak and to hear as it would be to rob him of his money. The right of speech should not be based on any person's where they were born or the color of his skin, but rather the simple quality of manhood is the basis for the right, and there let it rest forever. Thank you. So I start this peculiar topic speaking about what would have inspired simple men like myself and Mr. Lincoln. Of course, I had been following him for years. When he was debating Stephen A. Douglas, I frequently come back to the modern era and people ask me, Mr. Douglas, you debated Mr. Lincoln? And I have to correct them. No, that was Stephen A. Douglas with one S, the lesser Douglas. But I had been following Mr. Lincoln and his debates with Mr. Douglas in Illinois when they were both running for senatorship. And then I started reading and studying his philosophy, and over time learning more about Mr. Lincoln and how he, like I, was a self-made man. How he and I might have read the same books even. I know I read Shakespeare and the Aesop fables, and the great poets of the time, and the Colombian orator. I mean, I purchased this book. I was shining shoes on the streets of Baltimore just to purchase this book, The Colombian Orator, and learn my first poem out of this book. I can remember the boys as they were carrying the book, they would stop and they would recite the poem. You'd scarce expect one of my age to speak on public on the stage. And if I chanced to fall below Demosthenes or Cicero, don't view me with a critic's eye, but pass my imperfections by. Large streams and little fountains flow. Tall oaks from little acorns grow. And though I am now small and young, of judgment weak and feeble tongue, yet all great learned men like me once learned to read their ABC. So if you can imagine that, you can also imagine Abraham Lincoln might have set himself on a log reading a book and penned a poem to himself. Abraham Lincoln sits pen in hand. He will be good, but God knows when. And so, my admiration for Abraham Lincoln eventually found itself. Certainly in the election of 1860, when he stole that election out of the hands of the South, and of course the Democrats, he partnered with, of course, the Know Nothing Party and a peculiar marriage, and the radical Republicans to win the election. And I found myself making a choice that the Republican Party would be the only ship on the sea that I could find refuge. And I supported them. But now, how did I transform myself from chattel property to an abolitionist? How did I come to the conclusion, as contrary to what I was taught by the Garrisonians, my first speech in Nantucket Island when the Garrisonians invited me to speak. And I was introduced by Mr. Collins. He did a fine job this afternoon, as a matter of fact, introducing me. Mr. Collins would introduce me to the audience, and he would say, "Ladies and gentlemen, I have before you today Fred Douglass. He is a graduate from the Peculiar Institution of Slavery with his diploma written on his back." Well, I'm sure you all have your diplomas on your wall. But how did I come from the teachings of the Garrisonians that this was a flawed document that should be torn up and rewritten? That this was a pro-slavery document? Well, it's pretty simple. And it's what I tell people all the time. Once you can read, you will be forever free. Once you can read, you will be forever free. To sit in church and be told what's in the Bible, or to be at an abolitionist meeting and can't read the Constitution for yourself, puts you in quite a predicament. Now, to teach yourself how to read and write, as I did, with the help of so many, once I taught myself how to read and read the Constitution, and I come across this fine phrase, all men are created equal. Yes, life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. And then I eventually came to the conclusion that this is not a dead letter. It is a glorious liberty document. And I did that by going all the way back and reading about the founding fathers of this country. George Washington in particular, I had great esteem for George Washington. As a matter of fact, in 1874, I went to the Capitol in Annapolis, a fine building as it is, with a grand staircase, and right at the top of it is a painting of George Washington relinquishing his great power back to the people and the government. And I went there and I recited from memory his resignation speech, which is quite remarkable and almost in some cases a prophecy. I thought I might save just a couple of lines from that speech here. Yes. Over time and events, there will likely be political factions by which ambitious, cunning, and unprincipled men will subvert the power of the government, or the power of the people, and usurp for themselves the very reins of the government, thereafterwards destroying the very engine which brought them to unjust dominion. Certainly, George Washington was a wise man. So was the Marquis de Lafayette, who I held great esteem for. To leave his country and fight, to be a hero of two worlds, to come here and ask permission to fight in the American Revolution? Yes. He was an abolitionist. He, in South Africa, established a colony where he would give slaves an opportunity to free themselves. Yes. When he was here in America during the Civil War, hired a great colored man, James Armistead, a trusted spy for the Marquis de Lafayette. And so I had to pay him homage when, as soon as I could, this first time I went to Paris, France, I visited his grave. And early on, even in 1852, when I wrote the speech many of you might know best of me, What to the American Slave is the 4th of July, I was certainly giving credit to our founding fathers because they were brave men, they were peaceful men, but they chose revolution rather than peaceful submission to bondage. And so there it was on the 2nd day of July. They went to the British government and they took with them a resolution. And I keep that resolution right here. Let's see what it says. Oh, here we go. And I quote the resolution, July 2nd of 1776. Resolved that these united colonies are and ought to be free and independent states, that they are absolved of all allegiance to the British Crown, and that all political connections between them and the British Crown is and ought to be dissolved. And so, this former slave who can read for himself and make up his own intelligent mind, as I said in my speech, what the black man wants. I see no, uh, I see no term of color, race in this Constitution. Now, they did not define what men meant. It took them, I believe you said, till the year of our Lord, 1983, to recognize the woman? That all men and women are created equal? Elizabeth Cady Stanton had to remind them that when they drafted the Declaration of Sentiments. Yes. And so this is a living idea. And if it is a living idea, then you can add paragraphs to the letter. And so after the Civil War, that's what we set out to do, with a lot of obstruction from President Johnson. But we got it done. The 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendment proves that this is a living idea, that this country is made on a great idea that all men and women are created equal. And so I always stood firm on that once I understood what a gift we have in the Constitution. When I was in Faneuil Hall and on the centennial of this country in 1876, speaking alongside Garrett Smith and Mrs. Livermore and others, the only argument that we had at that time was that the woman had not had a chance to vote. They were saying, well, they were ignorant. They were saying that all of us were too ignorant to have the vote. I said, well, if we know enough to be hung, we know enough to vote. If the colored man knows enough to pay his taxes, he knows enough to vote. If he knows enough when he is sober, as the Irishman knows when he is drunk, he knows enough to vote. And that this country will never know what it ought to be until all the good people under it and all the bad people under it also have the right to bring whatever good or whatever bad there is in them into the government. These were the arguments we were making to make this a more perfect union. Yes. And so that's why I came to my conclusion that this is a glorious liberty document by the example set by our founding fathers. But I always remind the younger people, I see here that most of us here have the frost of winter visibly on our heads. But when I'm speaking to a younger audience, I'm telling them, you are today's founding fathers of our society. And the great Sidney Smith said, men seldom eulogize the fame and fortune of their forefathers except to exclude some folly or wickedness of their own. Those behind us must do their own work. We have done our work. Our founding fathers did their work, and they did much of it well. Now our children must do their own work. They have no right to wear out your reputations to avoid their own idleness. And so that is their charge for the country. Hopefully we have left them something to take hold of, to be civically engaged with. They must understand that there are 4 main boxes to our freedoms. The soapbox, the ballot box, the jury box, and the cartridge box. And if they want a stable democracy, then they should make sure that all of these boxes of our freedom are on equal footing, lest we find ourselves on a very rocky democracy. Yes. So that's in a nutshell how I came to my conclusions. I'm sure I will tell you that from where I was born in Talbot County to where I stand now here in Washington, D.C. before you, the distance is considerable. And the difficulty in getting from the former to the latter is by no means slight. As I started, there were many times when I might stand to give a speech and I'll be ran off the platform. We traveled. I was ran out of the country. I spent 21 months in England and Ireland. I had to leave again when John Brown raided Harper's Ferry and spent 6 months in England. But I always came back, even when they tried to bribe me. They said, Mr. Douglas, why even go back to America? We've already raised money for your manumission. We'll raise more money, and you can bring your family here and stay here in England with us. We've already abolished slavery. Well, how could I forget whole millions of my fellow men and women in bondage? I came back, and I've never regretted that decision. So, yes, I mean, the only thing I can say now, I mean, I cannot, I'd certainly be remiss if I did not recognize that we are just 2 days away from our President Lincoln's birthday. Yes, February the 12th, 1809. I was not so fortunate. I was born somewhere around the year 1818. I don't know. As many slaves did not know the dates of our births, the closest we could come would be planting time or harvest time. The only thing I had to hold on to was that my mother once came and she brought me a heart-shaped cake and she called me her little Valentine. So I chose February 14th as my birthday. Yes, yes. But of course, as I grew to admire and support Mr. Lincoln, um, it was a rewarding experience. And I mean, I ended up visiting him in his office 3 times. I think I certainly regret the time that I had to turn down an invitation for him. He invited me to his cottage to have tea. And when his secretary brought that invitation to me, unfortunately, I had committed myself to speak at another church here in Washington, D.C. And, well, I had a rule that if I made a promise, I would keep that promise. And so I had to turn down the president. And that would have probably been the time that we had the most cordial conversation. But very productive, the conversations we had when I went to his office. The first time he listened intently to my grievances about the Civil War, about our pay, about black officers in the ranks, about no such thing as a black prisoner of war. The Emancipation Proclamation brought those things to fruition. The fact that we would now be able to fight in the Civil War. And I was in Boston at the time and took my son straightway, and they enlisted in the 54th Regiment. My son Frederick Jr. was in the Mississippi Valley recruiting soldiers. And so maybe you all might have some questions in the end about my relationship with Mr. Lincoln. But it certainly was a cherished one. He was robbed of his life just much as that of Abraham Garfield. Two of the most sad days in my life. I mean, to have not one, but two presidents full of promise taken from us. But nevertheless, after Mr. Lincoln was gone, Mr. Grant took the Emancipation Proclamation and made it a fact. I often say that Mr. Lincoln wrote the Emancipation Proclamation. Mr. Grant made it a fact. He fought as hard as he could during Reconstruction to make sure that we got our just. And even I ended up with an appointment in at the bank, the Freedmen's Bank, which was falling apart by the time that I took control of the bank. And so these memories are just flooding my head now. Every time I come back here, so many things come back, and I have so many questions of me. Maybe you all might have some questions now. Uh, we can go forward with the questions. There was one thing, though, I wanted to do. You see, 207, that's what happens, that you forget some things. Because I did want to close, and I was trying to decide because I was having this wonderful conversation here with Mr. Dickinson about the Civil War and the sacrifice of our soldiers. And I was thinking about the speech that I made in 1875 on Memorial Day about our fallen unknown soldiers. But I had planned already to do the speech that I did in 1875 of Mr. Lincoln. So it certainly would, I mean, I'm torn between the Civil War Roundtable and the Lincoln Group. What should I do? What should I do? Which, well, you know, as in that time, the oration was the only bit of entertainment, period. And so the speeches would go on quite long. I mean, an hour. And so I certainly have had to abbreviate some of the speeches that I do because, well, of course, the modern audience has a short attention span. And so certainly you all might be walking out by the time I finish the speech. But I thought I might do, for you, sir, since you brought the topic up from the standpoint of the Civil War, and you had some relatives ancestors who fought in Petersburg, is that right? Yes. And so it was in July that I drafted this speech about the unknown loyal soldiers. We are sometimes asked, in the name of patriotism, to forget the merits of that fearful struggle and to remember with equal admiration those who struck at the nation's life and those who struck to save it, those who fought for liberty and justice and those who fought for slavery. I am no minister of malice. I will not destruct the fallen. I will not repel the repentant. But if my right hand forgot her cunning and my tongue cleaved to the roof of my mouth, let me never forget the difference in the parties of that terrible, protracted, bloody conflict. We are asked to forget a war which has made stumps of men in the very flower of their youth, which has filled our land with widows and orphans, which has piled up a debt heavier than a mountain of gold and swept countless thousands of men into bloody graves and planted agony at a million hearthstones. I say, in the name of all things sacred, what shall men remember? We've come here not to save manly courage, save what it displayed in that noble cause. But let us never forget that victory to the rebellion meant death to the republic. Let us never forget that the loyal soldiers who rest beneath this sod flung themselves between the nation and the nation's destroyers. Yes. Yes.
Thank you, Mr. Douglas. I forgot to mention, for the people online, if you have a question, type it into the chat box and be relayed to me to relay to Mr. Douglas. While we're waiting for those questions to start coming in, I just want to mention a few of the Lincoln Group's upcoming programs. On Tuesday, March 10th, our regular monthly program via Zoom will feature our very own immediate past president, David Kent, talking about his new book about Abraham Lincoln's travels in New England. On March 21st, mark your calendars, it's a very important date. The Abraham Lincoln Institute Symposium, a free symposium, will be held at Ford's Theater from 9:30 in the morning till about 5 p.m. or 5:30. You have to go on the Ford's Theater website to get a free ticket. Only can be admitted with a ticket that you pick up at the box office. And on April 7th, we're going to have a unique member-led program featuring four or five of us speaking about various aspects of the issue of Abraham Lincoln and the founding. Okay. So we ready with questions? Anything coming in, Kurt? We have a first
Yes.
question here.
Can you talk about,
So I'm gonna, we have.
Put your hand up and Eileen will come to you and you'll have the mic. But Mr. Douglas, our first question, did you help Lincoln win Maryland in the election of 1864?
Well, I certainly, I was a resident of New York.
Uh-huh.
And I was actually a delegate, and I have you know that I was the one who brought the election ballots from New York and delivered them here to Washington, D.C. But I campaigned all over the place for Mr. Lincoln, and certainly that would have been one of them, yes.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Hands up?
I want to make sure, is this working?
Yes.
It is, okay. All right, here we,
Thank you for your service to our country and your incredible oration. It's moving.
Thank you, sir.
I was wondering, on the other side of the river, on the other side of Anacostia, from where
Yes.
you live, in Old Town Alexandria, there's a statue of a boy on Washington Avenue, I believe, Washington and King Street.
Hmm.
It is a boy, it is a young soldier, a young Confederate soldier, who the money was raised for that statue and for a lot of others after Reconstruction
Yes.
to memorialize the young men that fell in that cause, that ill-fated cause, a cause that was not that would have led to the destruction of the Union, but yet, as you have said very articulately, the mothers and the fathers, they were still their sons who suffered greatly.
Sure.
Should those statues be allowed to exist?
Well, that would be for the public to decide. I would say certainly in the telling of the history, we certainly want to avoid what happened after the Civil War, that this lost cause narrative would leave out the sufferings of whole millions of fellow men and women in bondage. I said at that time, they are the apostles of forgetfulness. If I lose a coin, sir, if I lose a nickel, and I come to you and I say, Mr. David, I've lost a nickel. And you say, well, tell me about the nickel. And I say, well, on one side it has a buffalo. Look for the buffalo. You will only have a 50% chance of finding the nickel because there are two sides to the nickel, sir. So we must tell the entire story. I believe you all say with the technology, we have people who are not here that can ask questions. And I was talking to a group who were listening in to us in Annapolis. And the gentleman called and asked the same question that you asked about the fact that the monument of Roger Taney has been removed from Annapolis. Well, my answer was simple. Why did they do that? I was looking forward to giving him another piece of my mind. How can I stand here and make any sense if I'm only telling one side of the story? Certainly, anything that has happened in my lifetime of the 19th century, I can give you another point of view. I hope that answers your question. Now, of course, it still is only your decisions as to what monuments stand and which fall, or what monuments go up. I mean, this was true of the Emancipation Monument, that the pennies, nickels, and dollars of former slaves erected that monument. And there were some questions about what that monument should look like. That the fact that Alexander Archer which many people don't know the name of this man who was rising out of bondage, has a name and has a purpose. Even, I mean, I wrote a letter to the editor of the Washington Post stating as much, that that was not the monument that we had initially chose, but that's the one that I spoke to on April of 1875. Yes.
I have a question, but just to close the loop on that previous question, that statue on South Washington Street has been gone now for at least a couple of years, if not longer. But my question is on a different matter. I want to know what it was like to be at the Seneca Falls conference.
Oh, well, it was certainly, oh my goodness. I mean, it gives me chills just to think about me there with all the women. You see, I had just came to Rochester in June of 1847, and right after Elizabeth Cady Stanton, they already had a plan. Her, Mrs. Mott, the McClintocks, they went over to the McClintock house and they sit down and they drafted the Declaration of Sentiments, and they sent me a telegram to Rochester that I was invited to the convention. And I get there in Wesleyan Chapel, and it is full of people. In the balcony, people outside, crowded around, looking in the window. Mostly women. The men were there, but they were mostly there to ridicule the women for having the audacity to stand up and demand their rights. But on that first day, they read the Declaration of Sentiments. They read the 19 amendments to the Declaration of Sentiments, and we all cast our votes. And I was asked to speak that day. Yes, yes. And so with great pride, I did support the women's suffrage movement that day. And thereafter, as the Declaration of Sentiments went on to Syracuse and then to Rochester and across the country. So hopefully it has been ratified now.
1920. 1920.
What happened in 1920? The woman's right to vote, the franchise. I see. Wonderful. Wonderful. I'm so happy that happened. Yes. Yeah, so, I mean, if you want to join us now, I mean, with the advent of time travel, I'm there at every year. For the past 7 years, I've been back in Seneca Falls. I was there just this past year of our Lord, 2025, with all the women of the suffrage movement and the young women and the little Girl Scouts and everything celebrating women's suffrage. Yes, ma'am. Mm-hmm. Yes.
I had a question. Abraham Lincoln was the 16th president of the United States, but he was the first one to sit down in the White House with black people, with black men,
Yes.
not as servants or as slaves even,
Yes.
but as equals to sit down and discuss policy matters.
Yes.
When you met with him in the White House, were you aware of the historic nature of that? And
I
what did
was.
you think of it?
I was. And that first time I was quite apprehensive that I might not even get to see Mr. Lincoln. But I had been urged to go there. I mean, I had been heavily recruiting soldiers for the war. And then once we got that right to fight, all of the recruitments fell off considerably. And as I started talking to the men and getting feedback from other abolitionists, why are the men not enlisting? And it was because, firstly, they were not getting equal pay. Secondly, there were no black officers in the ranks. And there seemed to be no such thing as a black prisoner of war. So going there, I was greatly surprised that Mr. Lincoln invited me in and listened to me intently, and gave me feedback on all of those things and made promises that, well, he offered me, a commission as an officer, which never came, but nevertheless, he was an honest boatman, Mr. Lincoln. And then the second time I was there, this was now, he was concerned that the war was not going well, and that if enough slaves did not escape, that we might end up losing the war. And so I went there to share a plan that John Brown had about having slaves coming up from the South through a corridor through the Appalachian Mountains, 25 miles apart, with people to help them make their way. And so these were things we discussed then. And even then, he showed his respect for me because the governor of Connecticut, a very powerful governor at the time, was waiting next on the roster to see him. And he told his secretary, let him wait. I've been waiting to talk to Mr. Douglas. Yes.
Get to you. Go to the back row here.
Thank you. Mr. Douglas,
Yes.
shortly after the assassination of President Lincoln, you said, and I may be misquoting you slightly, but you said he was the best friend the Negro ever had. Then just before your death, you said that Lincoln was the greatest man you ever knew. Then we come back to 1876 in your speech at the dedication of the Freedmen's Memorial. Your comments on Lincoln seem somewhat to disconnect those two previous quotes I've given you.
Well, it
You
was a
elucidate on
complicated relationship. And as I said in that speech, truth is proper and beautiful at all times and in all places. We must admit, it must be admitted, that Abraham Lincoln was not, in the fullest sense of the word, either our man or our model. In his interests, in his habits of thought, and in his prejudices, he was a white man. He was predominantly the white man's president, entirely devoted to the welfare of white men. You are the children of Abraham Lincoln. We are at best his stepchildren, children by adoption, children by the forces of circumstance and necessity. So there were different times when I certainly was upset with what Mr. Lincoln was saying, his first inaugural speech, when he was saying that freedom might be 100 years away. I was greatly upset about that. But over time and after his death, even Murray Todd Lincoln saw me first on the list to get one of his walking sticks. And so I'm carrying it today, not because I'm so feeble, but because it's quite a handsome walking stick, don't you think? Yeah. Mm-hmm. I think there was a lady here in the audience, or the gentleman in the plaid shirt there.
Yeah, sure.
Thank you very much for your comments. I had a question going back to the Revolutionary War, the Rhode Island Regiment, the Black Regiment, had ancestors involved in that, and then looking from that period, talking about military integration up until the aftermath, the Battle of the Crater, speaking of Petersburg, sort of thinking about your perspectives on what's the role of federal engagement in terms of advancing that type of integration, that type of inclusion, so to speak, thinking forward to obviously the past 100 years to the very early days of this Civil War roundtable. What should we learn from those experiences from the Revolutionary War up into the Civil War?
Well, I mean, I certainly took notes of the integration of soldiers in the Revolutionary War, the Black Minutemen of Massachusetts, the Ethiopian Regiment. And when we went to Mr. Lincoln's cabinet, I said to him, if we were good enough to fight alongside McClellan, Washington, why would we not good enough to fight alongside McClellan? It's great justification. And so we said, you are fighting this war with one hand. You're fighting it with the soft white hand, and you have your steel black hand behind your back. And it took some doing. It took General Butler and Fort Monroe and the contraband and a host of us pleading with Mr. Lincoln. I mean, he said it's an abolition war, and some said but he calmly and bravely heard all the voices around him and made up his mind. So going forward, I mean, if the history cannot be so good as it serves the present or the future. If you're going into the future without a semblance of the past, as Mark Twain said, history may not repeat itself, but it often rhymes. Mhm. Yeah.
Here, and then we'll go to the remote audience,
Yes.
right here.
This working? Yeah. Mr. Douglas, in the, say, the first year of Lincoln's presidency, you just mentioned his first inaugural address, that you were upset. And I'm just wondering, interacting with him, how did you express your upsetment, if I can use that word? Was it arguing or persuading, or how did you handle and express to him, if you did, that you were upset?
Oh, it was free speech. And look, unfortunately for me, I came back from England decidedly intent on having my own voice. And so with my newspaper, uh, the North Star newspaper, I had a platform that I could speak. In the same way that his speeches and comments would be publicized in the newspapers across the country, I had the North Star. And I had platforms that I would speak across the country, uh, denouncing some of the things that I thought that he should come along on. Fortunately, I had the radical Republicans on my side as well. They saw things the way that most of us did, even as late as his second presidency on his 10% plan. The radical Republicans said 10%, at least 50% for the South to rejoin the Union. And so, well, unfortunately, you can't go to my papers and read that. I lost many editions of my newspaper at a fire we had in Rochester at my home on South Avenue. I don't know what happened there. The fire, it was very suspicious. And the papers meant that were headed for the Smithsonian were all destroyed in that fire. But you could go back and read some of the things that some of the things that I said about Mr. Lincoln and his positions at the time.
A question from online audience.
Yes.
You mentioned General Grant in your talk. Can you talk more about your interactions with President Grant? Did you meet with him in the White House? How many times?
Yes, many times. He actually, I don't know if you know this or not, but he commissioned me to go down and for the annexation of Santo Domingo. And so President Grant and I, we worked hard together to see that Reconstruction would happen. His presidency was sometimes riddled with scandal and things like that. But we still worked as hard as we could. The damage done, though, by President Johnson was almost insurmountable. Even though we had a coalition in the Congress, in the Senate, that would override his vetoes, that kind of damage that's done to the will of the people, which all things in the end are up to the people on whether they will support this financially with their taxpayer dollars, with soldiers deploying troops to the South. It's up to the people. And by the time that Grant came to the end of his presidency, the people were just exhausted with this issue of the South and protecting the slave. But again, Grant made it a fact as much as he could.
Question, and then we'll go over here. We have two. I think you've talked about how important it was, your literacy, and I'm sure that was discouraged among enslaved people. So can you tell us, how did you learn how to read? And was that extremely rare among other, enslaved people, and how important it was to your growth and development?
It was quite rare, although my mother, I was told that my mother could read. Now, where she learned to read, I do not know, and I never saw my mother but a handful of times, but I was told that she could read. But I was primarily, when I was sent to Baltimore to live with my master's cousins, Hugh and Sophia All, it was Mrs. All who initially taught me a few ABCs and let me sit beside her as her son, Master Thomas, was studying his schoolwork. and reading some from the Bible. And then as I was walking the boys and girls to school, I would see that they were carrying the Columbian Orator, and then other people like Father Lawson, who was a lay minister in Baltimore. I would visit his house during the day, and he would teach me from the Bible, and he would tell me if I found Christ that I would be free. Yes. Well, I've realized it was. I prayed for 20 years for my freedom. It was not until I prayed with my legs that I found my freedom. Yes, yes.
All right, we'll go over here.
Thank you. Mr. Douglas, I'm curious about your relationship with Harriet Tubman, if you could speak to that.
Yes, yes. You mean Miss Ross from, yes. Well, she was born in Dorchester County. That's about a half a day's walk from Talbot County. And I certainly did not know Mrs. Ross, Araminta Ross, before we escaped from bondage, but her reputation preceded her everywhere she went. And she became a part of the Underground Railroad. And as a matter of fact, we communicated through letters. She communicated with John Brown through letters. There was a time, actually, as a matter of fact, that she came to, and in the middle of the night, someone knocks on my door. My son, Charles, he comes, he says, "Father, there's someone at the door." I open the door. There stands Harriet Tubman with 12 runaways. And so she spent the night. She left the runaways for me to help get over to Canada, and she went back. And so certainly had a wonderful relationship with her. When her writer, writing the narrative for her, finished, they sent me a copy of her narrative and asked me to endorse her book. And I remember writing her back saying, "Mrs. Tubman, you asking me to endorse your book. You are the Moses of the people." And I mean, I've certainly had the applause of thousands of people in speeches, but you, through helping our footsore men and women in bondage, only had the stars and the lightning bugs giving you applause that you brought them into freedom. So I wrote her a great endorsement for her book. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, we are so inspired by so much of what you've done and said. I'm thinking about the terms agitate, 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 just to kind of keep up that force. And with so much that you have, the inspiration you've had over the years, hundreds of years. I'm also interested in
Well, reports of my longevity have been greatly exaggerated,
that.
I assure you.
The impact. But you're so full-rounded. The fact that with all that you've done and all over the world, you found a way and time to train yourself to play the violin. And one of your children did the violin too. Can you give us an idea of the role of the arts and expression as being continuing a part of the whole humanity that you're being able to get across? Thank you.
Well, I played the violin just as a pastime to keep myself company. I can remember when it came in handy when I first moved to Rochester on South Avenue on Alexander Street, which was in a suburb of Rochester. A lot of people nearby and wondering who this colored man that had moved into the city. And I would get out on the porch and play the violin to warm up things. But it was my son Joseph, grandson Joseph, who really excelled at playing the violin and played classically in Europe. So the arts are certainly, they speak of this in Corinthians, gongs and clanging cymbals, what they can do for the souls of men. So, yes. Mm-hmm.
Good evening, Mr. Douglas.
Yes.
You spoke just a minute ago of your relationship and knowledge with Miss Ross.
Yes.
And I noticed in the brochure that was shared with us this evening, a picture of Miss Frances Harper.
Oh, yes.
And so I wondered if you could speak a bit about your relationship knowledge of Miss Harper?
Well, Mrs. Harper falls in that category of great speakers, orators, and poets. And I knew many, many poets of the 19th century. As a matter of fact, you all would be advised to understand that the historians, and many of you are in here, they can tell you about the dashes, but it's the poet, the dots, but it's the poet who gives you the dashes between the dots. Many times the poet can tell you as much about history as the historian. And Frances E.W. Harper was one of those. She was not only a great orator, but a great poet as well. One of the favorite poems that she wrote that I love is, "Bury me in a free land. Oh, make me a grave wherever you will, on a lowly plain or a lofty hill. Make it among earth's humblest graves, but not in a land where men are slaves." I could go on. I mean, it's just such a great sentiment of the colored people at that time who may not ever see freedom. They just wanted to be buried in a free land. Yes. Mhm.
Did you ever talk to Mr. Lincoln about his idea of colonizing freedmen in the Caribbean or back to Africa?
Yes, I was quite upset about it. They said, "What shall we do with the Negro?" I said, "Do nothing with us. Your doing has already played mischief with us." And they had this plan to recolonize. I mean, I think he might have been reading about the Marquis de Lafayette and what he did in French in South Africa. But when they came to me, I said, "I am a colored man of both Anglo-Saxon and African descent. I was born here. I am a citizen, and I will not go back." That was my position. And they tried this repatriation, this colonization, but it did not. It did not work out.
Lincoln was serious about that, or was he just using it to placate white people that he was thinking
I
of
think
emancipation?
that many people who came to him were quite serious about it.
Was he serious?
Well, I never really had that much of a conversation with him about repatriation, not personally, but nevertheless, we were working as hard on our end to become fully enfranchised in American democracy. What the black man wants is to be fully enfranchised in American democracy. To be able to go to a store and be left alone, to be able to go to school and be left alone, to be able to go to the ballot box, just leave him alone, and he would do just fine. Yes.
We have time for one or
question.
two right here. Dr. Whelan?
Thank you. First of all, thank you for a great presentation. It's my understanding you were the first African-American marshal in the District of Columbia.
Yes.
And I think it was President Hayes. Did you meet a lot of difficulty in that position, being the first African-American? What was that like?
In many cases, it was ceremonious, just as, I mean, there were many times when another marshal would have had more leeway to do things, but it was difficult. And in addition to the hurdles I had from the public, occasionally you have a tendency to stick your own foot in your mouth. And so I'd gone over to Maryland, speaking to an audience in Maryland, and I just poured on a little bit too much praise for the policemen in Maryland, and it got back here. And I was greatly criticized for insinuating that the Maryland police were better than the District of Columbia. So, yes.
Any further questions? Well, that's not bad for a 208-year-old guy, right?
Yes.
It's pretty lively. Thank you for a great
Well,
program.
thank you. Thank you, citizens. Thank you so much. Yeah. Mhm.